What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Vincent Esposito, and today we are going to be talking about SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But before we get to that, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. If you like what you hear today, I'm coming out with videos on this, on lifestyle, nutrition, longevity, going forward for twice a week. So if you're interested, please subscribe below. And without further ado, let's get to the video. Now, before we talk about SIBO, it's important to keep one thing in mind for this video and also when we talk about any gut condition going forward. So 90% of all the cells in our body, think about that, 90% are actually not human cells. They're non-human cells, which means they're mostly bacteria and other microbes that are mostly found in our gut, specifically in the colon. And so that's where most of our gut microbiome is located. It's in the colon. So keep that in mind. So what happens in SIBO is these microbes end up making their way from the colon, from the large intestine, into the small intestine where they're not supposed to be. Now there's this valve that separates the large intestine from the small intestine known as the ileocecal valve. Reason being, the ileum is the final part of the small intestine and it goes into the colon. So when that valve might be malfunctioning, that can allow certain microbes and bacteria to actually make their move from the colon into the small intestine. This becomes a major problem because it could lead to things like maldigestion and malabsorption. So what do those mean? So maldigestion is simply our inability to digest the foods we eat properly, while malabsorption is our inability to absorb the nutrients and extract what we need from that food. Now in SIBO, this is an issue because most of that digestion and absorption process actually takes place in the small intestine. But if bacteria that are not supposed to be there get to it early, they will start taking up some of those nutrients and absorbing those nutrients instead of us, which leaves us nutrient depleted in the long run. Additionally, these bacteria can form endotoxins, which actually cause harm to the gut lining and could potentially lead to leaky gut, which leads to a whole host of different symptoms down the line. Some of those symptoms can include gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, IBS, fibromyalgia, even metabolic syndrome, diabetes, insulin resistance, autoimmune conditions, neuromuscular disorders, and even fat malabsorption. So how do we even get SIBO in the first place? Well, there's a variety of different mechanisms that are actually in place that could keep SIBO in check. But when they start malfunctioning or not working properly, that could potentially lead to SIBO. The first one on that list is actually low stomach acid levels, low hydrochloric acid levels. Now, when this happens, when you don't have adequate amounts of stomach acid, some of these opportunistic bacteria are not destroyed in the stomach as they're supposed to be. So if they survive, they can actually make their way through the intestines and then set up shop in the small intestine where they're not supposed to be. A lack of stomach acid could be quite detrimental for a bunch of different reasons, one of which is actually pancreatic insufficiency. So if we're not breaking down protein properly, which is one of the major jobs of the stomach, it puts a huge amount of stress on the pancreas to release certain hormones and enzymes to break down that protein in now the intestines, and over time can lead to pancreatic insufficiency. There are a couple of ways you could end up with low stomach acid levels. The first is consuming poor quality diet full of refined carbohydrates, processed sugars, artificial sweeteners over a long period of time, so months, years, things like that. The other common way you end up with low stomach acid levels is the overuse of things like H2 blockers, proton pump inhibitors, and antacids. These are actually only supposed to be taken about a week or two at a time and then discontinued. However, more and more often it seems, especially today, these are essentially a daily occurrence. They're taking them almost at every meal. This actually really significantly reduces the amount of stomach acid we have in our stomach over time. Other main causes of SIBO include poor intestinal motility, meaning our intestines aren't moving food along as they properly should, meaning foods end up getting stuck and allow bacteria to eventually settle in the small intestine. Also, other things include physical obstructions, say from things like Crohn's disease, diverticuli, or even intestinal neuropathy. Now, if you think you might have SIBO, there's a couple different tests you might want to run to make sure that is the proper diagnosis. The gold standard is the SIBO breath test. Now, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to drink some sort of glucose solution in water, and over about 3 hours, you're going to blow your breath into test tubes at 15 to 20 minute intervals. That's sent to a lab, and then you check if you have SIBO or not. There are a couple other tests you could do if you want to help back up or use as a supplement to the breath test. One is a stool analysis, where you can check if there's any sort of lack of diversity in the gut microbiome or things of that nature, but it's important to realize that it's not definitive of SIBO like the breath test is. The other useful test, but again, not definitive of SIBO, is an organic acid urine test. This is actually useful to see if there's any potential DNA damage, nutrient deficiencies, and things of that. So if you need to address those deficiencies, it's a great supplement to the SIBO breath test. So if you know you have a SIBO diagnosis, there's a few different treatments you could try out at home that could be helpful. The first one is called a low FODMAPs diet. Now, FODMAPs stands for fermentable oligo, di, and monosaccharides and polyols. That's definitely a mouthful, but I'll try to break that down for you. Essentially, foods that are high in FODMAPs are poorly digested in the small intestine and poorly absorbed in the small intestine. Additionally, to make matters a little bit worse, they're also rapidly fermented by bacteria. And again, bacteria getting into the small intestine is the problem with SIBO in the first place. Now, I will share a link to what a low FODMAP diet consists of. I'll do that in the description below. But generally, you want to stick with the low FODMAPs diet for about a month. And similar to how you would perform an elimination diet, you slowly start reincorporating the other food. So you'll take one food that is a high FODMAPs food after that month, have it, wait 3 days, see if you have any symptoms, and then you move on to the next food. And so that's how it's very similar to an elimination diet, at least on the back end of it. The next key is to stay hydrated. Now, generally, I suggest that you consume at least half your body weight in fluid ounces of water. So if I weighed 150 pounds, I would be consuming at least 75 ounces of water per day. The reason being, this will help flush out any of the bad bacteria throughout the day. So make sure you're staying hydrated throughout the process. The next strategy is actually intermittent fasting. Now, the reason intermittent fasting might do well for someone with SIBO is because if you're limiting your eating window, if you're restricting your eating window, these bacteria have less food available at any given time. So some of those opportunistic bacteria that have made their way into the small intestine will eventually start dying off. So limiting the amount of food they're given over the day and restricting it to a certain amount of time seems to be helpful for people with SIBO. Number 4 is to reacidify the stomach. So we need to get that stomach acid, if those levels are low, back to normal. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can either use apple cider vinegar or lemon juice in a glass of water before each meal, or you can use a betaine hydrochloric acid supplement. I'd suggest working with a provider to make sure you can kind of figure out which way is best for you. The next one is get outside and get enough exercise. So vitamin D3 is actually really important for gut health overall and the absorption of nutrients from the gut. So we need adequate amounts of vitamin D3, and that's actually really low in many people overall. So get outside. Additionally, exercise is really helpful for reducing inflammation overall and could help with SIBO long term. Finally, there's a really powerful tool in the functional medicine space known as the 4R protocol. Very useful for a variety of different health conditions, but I am not going to go through that today because that's enough information for its video on its own. So stay tuned for something on that. The 4R protocol is a method to essentially remove any potential opportunistic bacteria, parasites, or anything else that might be doing harm to the gut, and replacing and repairing whatever damage has been done over time. But stay tuned. Like I said, I'll get a video on that in the future. And that's all we have for today. So I hope you learned a little bit about SIBO and what you can do at home to combat it. If you like this video, please subscribe and like below. And keep the dialogue open. I want to see what's going on with you guys. I want to hear from you. I want to see if there's other ways I can help. So please comment below. I'll get to it as quickly as I can. And until next time, take care, guys.